Hey, what's up guys? This is Anthony from AnthonysCustoms, and for this review, we are looking at the Storm Collectibles Street Fighter V M BISON. And this is one that you guys know I was very excited about. You guys probably also know that there's nobody more into collecting Street Fighter action figures than me. So this is a very exciting time. We have this Figure Arts line coming out. We have the Storm Collectibles line coming out. There's rumors of a new... I guess they're not really rumors. There's talk of a new Pop Culture Shock line coming out, so it's just, there's awesome stuff happening. And so far, Storm Collectibles has been both very impressive and very disappointing at the same time, and that's going to be the case for this figure as well. As good as this line is looking, you know, we see a lot of really good things. It's kind of like mixing NECA styling with import articulation, that kind of thing, and it's a fantastic thing. However, we have the quality control that is just becoming a relatively severe problem. So we're going to talk about all of these things in this review, so make sure you stick around to the end. So let's go ahead and get this guy off the stand and take a closer look. This guy stands just about 19.5 centimeters to the very top of his head. If you straighten his head up a little bit, you'll get a little bit more height out of his hat, so that's up to you. That puts him at just about 7 3/4 inches. So he definitely has some size. I know a lot of you guys really like to compare figures even though it's not practical. So let's go ahead and do it since I have a couple. I happen to have them sitting around. Here's Death's Head. He's one of the largest of the standard release Marvel Legends figures. They are almost the exact same size. Here we have a little bitty Spider-Man. Stand-up Spider-Man. This Spider-Man ended up getting really loose hips. And he's just been sitting there in the background of my streaming video, so I don't know what happened there. And then we have Ryu, and we'll stand Ryu up from the same line. No point in comparing SH Figure Arts. They're not even close to the same size. I know it's not center, but you guys can get an idea. So you could fudge it in terms of mixing these figures in with your Marvel Legends. As you can see, Death's Head is about the same size, which Bison's only supposed to be 5'11", so it's not quite right, but you get the idea. They're not in scale, but you could get them close enough. Alright, so if you don't have any of those figures, that won't really help you, but I did give you the size measurement, which is universally helpful. Now, like I said, this guy does have some very impressiveness to him, and he's also got some very disappointmentness to him. We're going to start with the disappointment. That way we can end on a positive note. Hopefully, we'll see how that goes. So the first thing is this issue with the shoulders. And I do want to talk about that more specifically once we get to the articulation, but just note that there is a there's a very serious quality control issue with the shoulders. And there's rumors going around about why that is. We'll talk about that when we get to the articulation. But the other issue is I have on my figure 2 right biceps, which is not cool. This is the right bicep. This is also the right bicep. And by right, I don't mean correct. I mean right side of his body. This is the same piece as this, and it shouldn't be. This should be a different piece. So that's very disappointing. It's going to be very hard to make him look good when the arm isn't on the right side of the body. Luckily, the rest of it is the same, but hopefully I can get this swapped out. I've contacted Big Bad Toy Store. We'll see how that plays out. Okay, now before we can talk about any more of the figure, let's talk about accessories, because this guy does have a fair bit of accessories. We have 3 different faces. We have the standard face, which is just very neutral. We have one face where he's laughing with his mouth open. Then we have one face where his teeth are showing and he's got a very maniacal looking grin. Mostly these faces look really good. We do have a little bit of an issue of likeness accuracy again. Much like Ryu, it doesn't not look like him, but it definitely has kind of a weird feel to it. I feel like the 2 open mouth faces look a lot better than the one that's just neutral. It's not bad, but it's definitely, there's something off about the face. So I'm not sure about that, but we'll leave it right there. We have a few different hands. We have the 2 fist hands that come on him in the package, 2 style pose hands with the fingers kind of curled, 2 more hands which I'm not quite sure what they're for. They almost look like gripping hands, but they don't really grip anything. Then we have 2 wide open hands that are a little bit more relaxed but still kind of out there. And then we have 2 of those same hands but with the translucent plastic and pink shading. We have 2 effect parts that go on his hands, though they kind of just key into his fingers. Then it's like he's holding little purple and pink fire, and it's done very nicely. It's translucent plastic with nice saturated color shading throughout. And then we have one more, which is for like a swiping uppercut type of effect. It's not a Shoryuken, but it has that same kind of look, and it's sculpted very nicely, slides over his hand very nicely, and it just looks really good. So very nice effect parts there. We do have interchangeable crossed arms. Now the regular arms obviously have articulation. And the wrist pieces are separate pieces. They're floating soft plastic. The crossed arms, it's all one solid sculpt for each side. They do separate to help you put them into his body. And they just use the ball pegs. And we'll talk about that more when we get to the shoulder issue, when we get to the articulation. And then lastly, for the actual accessories for the figure, we do have an interchangeable skirt piece, which is almost the same thing, but it's got kind of like a windswept look, and it's blown open to be a little more accessible for posing, and I like that they included that a whole bunch. It is worth mentioning that interchanging the skirt piece is very difficult. I have had no luck just pulling it apart. What you have to do is separate the ball peg here, or I guess you could technically pop off each leg, or at least one of them. I really wouldn't recommend that. But you have to separate the ball peg from this torso, and I can't get it to separate. So it looks to me like you're going to have to use a hairdryer to warm this up in order to swap out the skirt. So be very careful, because once you warm this up, this is going to be even softer, and it could tear very easily because it's just a tiny piece. So be aware that swapping out the skirt is rather difficult, at least for mine. Maybe other people haven't had any issue, but I'm fairly strong, and I pulled on it. I can't get it to come apart, so be aware of that. And then lastly, overall, we just have the standard display stand for this line with the Street Fighter V base and the adjustable upright piece, which does look a little bit mechanical, but I think it's okay. So now that we've got all of that out of the way and we're almost 7 minutes into the video, let's talk about the figure. How's the paint look? It's pretty good. I do kind of like the way they're doing this sort of wash coloration. You can see it just kind of pools up in a little bit of the areas. And I don't know, for me, I kind of like it. And at the same time, I would prefer a more traditional type of shading. But either way, it's fine. It is what it is, and it doesn't look bad, so that's okay. All of the metal pieces are like a really dark gunmetal with a lighter silver dry brush on top, and I think that looks okay. Same thing is true for the leg armor down here. So that's good. The black paintwork going around for the trim on his outfit, it's definitely clean enough. It's not absolutely perfect, but I am perfectly okay with it. His boots do have gloss black, at least for the feet, and then the backs of the legs. It does look very nice. It's like a patent leather look, so that's pretty cool. And they painted the sole with a flat black, which I do really appreciate little details like that, so it's very nice. The gold on the belt buckle is pretty clean. Same thing is true for the hat. No real issues with the paint. I mean, it's got that kind of a dirty look due to the way they did the shading, but that's intentional, so that's okay. And then the faces we already looked at, but you can see it's just a little bit iffy. Something about the face is off, but it's not bad. And then, of course, the sculpt. The sculpt is... it's pretty good. I have to say, I do like this more naturalistic sculpt. They do supposedly all of their sculpting by hand, which is very similar to most of NECA's figures, and that's why it has that kind of NECA vibe to it. And then we have the more advanced articulation, so that's why I made that comparison. Now, I'm okay with the sculpt in general. There are two places that I don't really care for it. One is the shins. These are on the right sides, but the shin kind of curls out. You can see on this side in particular, the way it just has a little bit of a swoop going out, and it does make him look kind of knock-kneed. It's not terrible, and once you pose him, it's okay, but it's just something to note. Then the other thing about the sculpt is fine if you're able to account for it, and that is the torso. The articulation here for the separation. This is a floating torso, the upper body. This is a solid block of plastic, and this is a floating piece with a skeleton inside to connect the neck and all the articulation. Now, when I got mine, and I imagine most people are going to have this issue just from posing it, this piece kind of works its way up, and he ends up with a snowman effect. It's not terrible, but it does end up sitting too high, and it looks a little bit weird. You can, since it's floating though, just kind of squish it back down. You can see how it just mushes. You can squish it back down, and it will give you a much more seamless look, and I'm perfectly okay with it once it's down. So just be aware of that. You might be able to adjust it, so no issues there. So otherwise, the sculpt is really nice. Now let's talk about the articulation. The head on a double ball peg, and the neck this time can actually move around. Unlike Ryu, it's a separate piece from the shirt, which is much easier to do for Bison, so that makes sense. It doesn't give you the best of range, but it will move around, and the shirt doesn't squish it back too much. It'll give you a little bit of extra posability, but you do get really nice range out of that double ball peg, so that's a good thing. I like the way the head works. Shoulder pads are soft plastic, and they peg into this floating piece for the shoulder. Just like Ryu, he's got that inner shoulder piece so that the shoulder's butterfly can work, and we'll get to that in just a second. So this piece can move around. It won't impede the articulation at all because it's a very, very nice soft plastic. It's one thing that Storm does really well, and that is to use the soft plastics for that effect. You don't really need this piece to be soft plastic, even though it is. It doesn't hurt anything, but it is soft despite not really being necessary, but it's okay. So now that we're here, let's talk about this shoulder issue. These guys are meant to come out, and we'll talk about the breakage issue in just a second. I want to show you this first. So we have this floating piece. This is hard plastic. This is the soft plastic that pegs into it. And then you have the ball peg that goes through this, and that's where you get your butterfly. This whole this ball peg is what makes the entire thing move around, gives you your forward, back, up, and down, everything. Then you have your hinge for your shoulder, which works effectively. It's not too bad. I'm going to run through the arm real quick since we have it here. We have our standard bicep swivel. It'll work better if you have the right bicep piece actually on the arm, but it's okay. Then you have your double jointed elbow, which will at least give you 90. It'll be a little bit better when you have the correct side on there. I can show you on this side. It's slightly better, but it's still just about 90 degrees. So not the best range, but it's good enough. Then for the wrists, we have our ball peg to ball hinge. So there's a ball peg that goes into the forearm. You can see that here. These don't fall off like on Sub-Zero, so that's good. Then you have your ball hinge, which allows you to move your hand around. These are nice and soft, but they do kind of still impede the articulation, so you're not going to be able to pose the hands all that well, to be honest, but it's not bad. It's okay, and the hands are still soft plastic, so that's really helpful. So now we have this issue of, you can actually see the skeleton in here pretty well. So you can see inside, let's see if we can focus inside. There we go. Hopefully we can see. There we go. Okay, we're not going to worry about the skeleton. This piece goes all the way across. It connects to both shoulders. So this is the socket for the ball peg, and that allows the arm to move around, obviously. And you're supposed to be able to pull these off and swap in these guys, okay? So that's how the interchangeable arms work. Now, rumor has it, Storm told somebody somewhere that it was too tight the way they designed it, and instead of having to go in and redesign the shoulder articulation, they just went in and cut this right here. By cutting that, it allows for it to flex a little bit more, and you can pop the ball peg in and out much more easily. Well, that makes sense, except if Storm really did that, that is really, really not okay. That's a huge cost-cutting issue, and the problem is it resulted in this being far too loose. When I went to pose the figure, as soon as I got him out of the package, I barely moved the shoulder, and it came right out. Now, some are going to be looser than others due to this. Some are going to probably seem okay, but I imagine as you pull it in and out, you're going to have more and more issues. And in fact, I'm guessing the reason they did that is because if they didn't, not only would it be too hard to change out the arms, but the act of doing so would actually put stress cracks in here on its own. And that's what happened with Ryu and even some of the joints on the Mortal Kombat ninjas. All of these hard plastic sockets, if you take your figure apart and look at it, you'll see, I would bet money, they all have stress marks or cracks. My Ryus, almost all of them, every single one of these hard sockets have cracks in them. It's because of the type of plastic they're using. So, to talk about this crack a little bit more, I looked at both sides, and the idea that they were cracked intentionally by cutting them could be possible because these are not molded marks. They're not uniform across all the figures. They're in different places. So it's possible they went in there and cracked them intentionally, or it's possible that just the act of pegging the arms in originally split the joint. Either way, it's an unacceptable quality control issue that Storm needs to figure out, and especially since we've seen it across multiple figures now, not just all the M-Bisons, but Ryu and the Mortal Kombat ninjas in the wrists. We've seen way too many QC issues for a line that needs to be really successful. I mean, look how fantastic the figures are overall, and then we have QC issues, so hopefully they can work that out. But if they really did just go in and break it intentionally, then that's a huge red flag. We cannot have that kind of QC cost-cutting behavior. It is not okay. Let's move on from that though, because the rest of the figure is mostly really good. We do have our ball peg for the torso. You could probably tell as I was handling him. He moves around really nicely, and one thing that is nice about this being soft plastic is it will allow you to flex it around a little bit better, and it'll give you a little bit better posability. So I don't mind this being soft plastic. I prefer the added articulation or added range because of it. Now we do have an upside down T for ball pegs. We have one going into the lower torso, which allows this whole guy to move around at that part. So if you combine these two joints, you really won't have any trouble posing him. It works very nicely. This is all very soft, obviously. And then you have a floating crotch piece inside, which is even softer and thinner, so that won't get in the way. Then for the hips, you just have another ball socket. Hopefully you can see that. I don't think the hips actually have any of the cracks. They are the hard plastic again, but the way they're designed, I'm pretty sure none of them have cracked on my guys, so that should be okay. But the legs can move around on those hips just fine. The only thing limiting it is the skirt. And you can see the socket, which the thigh will rotate around. And the socket itself can rotate. In fact, the thigh is too stiff it's just the socket rotating, and you already get that good range. So you're going to have no problem swiveling the thighs. For the knees, we have a double jointed knee. It moves much nicer than Ryu's, but we have a lot less range. So be aware of that, but it does feel a lot more smooth. I don't feel like it's going to break like Ryu, so that's a good thing. And then for the ankles, it's pretty much the same as the Mortal Kombat ninjas. We have the hinge, and it's on a ball peg, so there's a little bit of an offset. So you can bring the foot a little bit farther forward, and I really do like that. That's awesome. And you can do the same thing and bring it a little bit farther back, but not quite as far. But it's not bad. But here's the thing, because it's just a ball peg, it's a pretty minimal ankle rocker. It's there, but it's not great, so be aware of that. It's going to be a little bit limiting in that regard. And then we do have a toe hinge, which is there. It's kind of worthless. It's in the right place on the foot for the most part, but it doesn't have that much range. It's not super stiff, and there is a big gap in the sole because of how it's designed, so it's just okay. So ultimately, this is a figure that is both really good and disappointing in that the QC issues are just not okay. The wrong arm, and then maybe, it's just a rumor, but maybe purposely breaking the figure so that it doesn't break in people's hands. That is definitely not okay if that's the case. And if it's just breaking automatically on its own, then that's still not okay. It's a problem. So we need to get these issues addressed. And Storm, if you're watching this, we want this line to succeed. We want it to succeed so much. So just please get those QC issues fixed, and people are going to need to get their faith restored, and then they'll dump their money into your pockets, because we want these Street Fighter figures to be awesome. And they're so close. I mean, they are, but they just have those issues. So let's get that worked out, and I think everybody will be happy. So now you guys have all the information you need to decide if you want to buy this. I would personally say yes. If you're a Street Fighter collector, still go ahead and get it. Just be aware that the shoulders might end up being too loose. As you can see, it moves around pretty easily, but it's not entirely floppy, and it doesn't just pop out on mine too bad. The first time it did, after I've kind of reseated them, it's not so bad. And I've heard some people have really bad issues of the arms getting loose. I haven't had that issue yet, but I also haven't really popped them out more than I did in this review, so be aware of that. Wow, what a long review for a figure, but hopefully the information is helpful for you guys. So there it is. This guy is in stock at Big Bad Toy Store, so check out the link in the description below, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. I have new videos up every single day. We talk about action figures, movies, TV shows, video games, all kinds of fun stuff, so make sure you come back for that. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and in the meantime, keep collecting.